Turn over almost any iPhone and you will find 5 familiar words engraved on the back. Designed by Apple in California. It is a proud little sentence, a badge of American genius. But it hides a second sentence, one that Apple would never dream of engraving anywhere, and it is this. Built, almost entirely, by China. The most valuable company in the history of the world, the shining crown jewel of American technology, is quietly, deeply, almost helplessly dependent on China to physically bring its products into existence. So dependent that when Apple recently tried to escape, to move its factories somewhere else, it discovered something shocking. It could not fully leave. Because China holds the hands that build the phone, the tools that shape it, and a fast-growing share of the parts inside it. Tonight I am going to show you just how total that dependence really is. How China quietly proved it could slow Apple's escape whenever it wished. And the one honest, important exception that the loudest headlines always get wrong. Because there is a single crucial piece of that phone that is not Chinese at all, and knowing which piece it is tells you everything about where the real power lies. Let me start with the sheer scale of it, because it is almost hard to comprehend. For nearly 2 decades, Apple built its trillion-dollar empire on top of a Chinese foundation. Picture the factories where iPhones are born. They are not ordinary buildings. They are entire cities of manufacturing, sprawling complexes so vast that one of them earned the nickname iPhone City, home to hundreds of thousands of workers who can be summoned, housed, trained, and set to work at a speed and a scale that quite simply does not exist anywhere else on the planet. When a new iPhone launches, and the world wants tens of millions of them in a matter of weeks, there is currently only one place on Earth that can physically make that happen. And here is the part people misunderstand. Apple's own leader has said plainly that this is no longer about cheap labor. China stopped being the cheapest place to build things years ago. What China offers now is something far harder to replace. An incredibly deep pool of skilled workers, engineers, and tooling experts gathered together in one place, surrounded by thousands of parts suppliers, all within a short drive of each other. That density of skill, built up over 20 years, is the thing Apple cannot simply pick up and move. Apple's own leader once tried to capture just how deep that pool runs with a striking image. In the United States, he said, you could call a meeting of the specialized tooling engineers a company like his depends on, and you might struggle to fill a single room. In China, you could call that very same meeting and fill several football fields with them. That is not a gap in wages. It is a gap of an entire nation's worth of accumulated, hands-on skill, patiently built over 2 decades, and it is exactly why walking away is so agonizingly difficult. And for a long time you could at least say that while China assembled the phone, the valuable parts inside came from elsewhere. That is less and less true every year, and this is the part that should really widen your eyes. Chinese companies are no longer just screwing the phone together. They are climbing up the ladder, making more and more of the valuable pieces inside it. Consider one Chinese company that began years ago making simple cables and connectors. Today it has grown into a giant that assembles whole iPhones, builds the AirPods in your ears, and was trusted to assemble Apple's newest, most complex headset. Another Chinese company supplies the very screens on Apple's devices. Chinese firms have now quietly become the single largest group of suppliers in Apple's entire empire, and their number keeps growing year after year. So China is no longer just the hands that assemble the iPhone. It is increasingly the source of the parts inside it too, creeping closer and closer to the valuable heart of the product. And these Chinese suppliers are not creeping up the ladder slowly. They are sprinting. That cable maker turned assembly giant has been buying up factories to grab even more of Apple's business, and its revenue has been rocketing upward by double digits year after year, climbing toward the tens of billions of dollars. Every rung it climbs is a rung taken from a rival somewhere else in the world, often a rung that used to belong to a company in Taiwan, Japan, or America. This is the quiet pattern hiding underneath Apple's supply chain. With each new model, a little more of the phone's value is captured by a Chinese company, and a little less by everyone else. Apple did not just teach China how to assemble its phone. It is steadily handing China the knowledge of how to build every valuable piece inside it. and China is proving a very fast learner. If you find it as eye-opening as I do to see how deeply the symbol of American technology is woven into China, then subscribe to Sinova, because pulling back the curtain on these hidden dependencies is exactly the kind of thing this channel exists to reveal. Now let me show you what happened when Apple actually tried to break free. Because Apple is not blind, it got a terrifying glimpse of its own fragility during the pandemic. At the height of it, the giant factory complex nicknamed iPhone City was thrown into chaos, with strict lockdowns and frightened workers walking out and streaming away from the plant on foot, right in the crucial weeks before the holiday shopping season. Production of Apple's newest, most expensive phones seized up almost overnight. Apple was forced to warn its investors that customers would simply have to wait, and it lost billions of dollars in sales it could never get back. In that moment, the danger of betting your entire empire on factories inside a single country stopped being a theory and became a very expensive reality. Rattled by that chaos, and by the deepening trade war between America and China, Apple decided it had to reduce its dangerous reliance on that one country. So it began, with great effort, to shift some of its production to India, and it is genuinely happening. A growing slice of the world's iPhones, and an even larger slice of the ones sold in America, are now being put together in Indian factories, a real and rising number. In just 12 months, Apple assembled tens of billions of dollars worth of iPhones in India, and it is racing to roughly double that, aiming to build many tens of millions of units there within a couple of years. On the surface, that looks like the escape working. But keep two things in mind. India still puts together only about a fifth of all iPhones, while the great majority, including around 4 out of every 5 phones sold in America, are still made in China. And building in India actually costs Apple more, not less. So this is a slow, expensive retreat, not a clean break. But look underneath, and the escape starts to fall apart. Because those shiny new Indian factories are not truly independent. To build an iPhone in India, the factories there have been importing the crucial parts, the display assemblies, the cover glass, the camera modules, straight from China. In many cases, India is not really manufacturing the iPhone from scratch. It is performing the final assembly, snapping together a kit of pieces that were made in China and shipped over. The Chinese heart of the supply chain did not vanish. It just moved one step back, out of sight. And then China did something that pulled back the curtain completely, and it is the most important part of this whole story. As Apple and its partners tried to stand up these factories in India, they needed something only China could give: the experienced Chinese engineers and technicians who actually know how to run an iPhone production line, and the specialized machines to equip it. And China, quietly, began to restrict those things from leaving. It slowed the flow of its skilled people to the Indian factories, and made it harder for key equipment to be sent abroad. In one stroke, without firing a shot or making a speech, China reminded Apple of a brutal truth. It was not just the factory floor that Apple depended on. It was China's permission to take the knowledge of how to build the phone somewhere else, and that permission could be withdrawn. The escape route ran straight through Beijing, and Beijing controlled the gate. Here is the re-hook, the thing you must not miss, because it turns a story about factories into a story about power. Apple's dependence on China is not merely an awkward business fact. It is one of the single greatest sources of leverage that China holds over the entire American economy. Think about who we are talking about. Apple is America's most valuable company and its most iconic brand, a symbol of the country itself. And China holds that company's very ability to physically make its products in the palm of its hand. That is precisely why you see Apple's leader flying to Beijing again and again, praising Chinese suppliers, promising to keep investing enormous sums, and carefully staying on the right side of the Chinese government. He has to, because China could hurt Apple more directly, more quickly, and more painfully than almost any other lever it holds. The friendliness is not a choice. It is the rent Apple pays to keep the factories running. And here is what makes the trap so complete. China is not only the place where Apple builds its phones, it is also one of the biggest places where Apple sells them, accounting for something like a fifth of everything the company earns. So Beijing holds not one lever over Apple, but two. It can squeeze the factories that make the iPhone, and it can turn its own enormous public against buying the iPhone, all at the same time. And that second lever is already twitching, because as we saw in another story, Chinese buyers are increasingly choosing a homegrown champion over Apple out of national pride. Imagine both levers being pulled at once, the ability to build strangled on one side and the willingness to buy collapsing on the other. That is the nightmare that quietly shapes every careful, smiling decision Apple makes about China, and it is why the company treads so gently around a government that could wound it from two directions. Now, I promised you honesty, and here is the crucial exception that the headlines almost always get wrong, so listen closely. The single most valuable, most advanced part of the entire iPhone, its brain, the powerful processor chip that makes it think, is not made in China. Apple designs that chip itself, and it is manufactured on the island of Taiwan by the greatest chip maker in the world, not by China at all. So if you hear someone say that Apple depends on Chinese chips, gently correct them, because the crown jewel chip, the hardest and most precious piece, comes from Taiwan. China's grip is on the other 99 parts of the story. The assembly, the skilled hands, the tooling, the displays, the smaller chips and components, and the sheer ability to build the finished phone by the hundreds of millions. But do not let that exception comfort you too much, because here is the twist. You can have the most brilliant chip in the world sitting in a warehouse, and it is worth nothing until someone turns it, and 1,000 other parts, into a finished, working phone that people can actually buy. And that final act, that act of building at colossal scale, remains the thing that only China can currently do. Owning the brain does not help you if you cannot build the body, and the body is Chinese. So step back and see the whole strange picture, and notice which way the current is flowing, because it is not flowing the way Apple hoped. Every single year, Chinese companies make more of the iPhone, not less, creeping from the cheap outer work toward the valuable core, buying up factories, and winning a bigger share of Apple's business. Even as Apple pours effort into its Indian escape, the dependence on China in many ways keeps deepening. The most American product on Earth, the one that says "Designed in California" right on its back, rests almost entirely on a Chinese foundation, a foundation that Beijing has now shown it can shake, or steady, exactly whenever it chooses. That is not a comfortable place for the crown jewel of American industry to be, and everyone at the top of Apple knows it, even if they can never say it out loud. So the next time you hold an iPhone and read those proud words on the back, remember the sentence they left off. Yes, it was designed by brilliant people in California, but it was built, and increasingly filled, by China, in factory cities of a scale the West can no longer match, using skills the West gave away over 20 years, by a country that has quietly made itself impossible to leave. Apple did not just outsource its manufacturing. It handed a rival superpower a grip on its own throat, and it is only now, too late, discovering how tight that grip has become. If you want to keep seeing the hidden threads that tie the biggest names in technology to China, threads most people never notice, then subscribe to Sinova, and the next time someone calls a product truly American, ask them the only question that matters: where and by whom is it actually built?